The file begins. March 14th, 2026. The digital explosion was not of fire but of data. A nameless server, deep in the dark web's belly, regurgitated the most intimate fragments of a life lived under glass. Britney Spears' medical records, the diagnoses, the medications, the clinical observations, a granular, pause inventory of sins, not hers, but those committed against her. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom. Media outlets, initially cautious, quickly abandoned restraint. The details, once whispered in hushed tones, now screamed from every screen. The public, long fed on curated narratives, was suddenly confronted with raw, unvarnished truth, or what appeared to be it. The leak, an unprecedented violation, ripped open old wounds, reigniting the brutal debate over her conservatorship's legacy. Was it protection or prolonged pause incarceration? The documents, real or fabricated, cast a long, cold shadow, implying a fragility that many believed was strategically exploited. The market reacted. Public sentiment shifted. A cold current of pity mixed with a potent wave of anger washed over the digital landscape. The truth, like a broken mirror, reflected only fragmented despair. This was not merely a scandal. It was an anatomy of a fall, resurrected. The dust settled, leaving behind a bitter taste. Freedom, it seemed, was merely another cage, its bars forged from public expectation and digital surveillance. Every Instagram post, every fleeting dance became a posthumous audit. A shrug, a smile, a solitary walk on the beach. Each a potential symptom, a coded message for an audience starved for scandal or reassurance. Her digital footprint, once a defiant declaration of autonomy, transformed into a constant, involuntary confession. Her life post-conservatorship, under this new microscope, became a performance without an audience, yet with millions of scrutinizing eyes. The very acts intended to signify normalcy, a home-cooked meal, a new pet, a spontaneous outfit, were dissected with the precision of a pathologist. Is she well? Is she truly free? These questions, whispered and shouted, became the soundtrack to her existence. Isolation deepened. The vast digital ocean meant to connect instead became a barrier, separating her from genuine human connection. The weight of endless speculation, the burden of being a symbol, a case study in the pause, meat grinder of fame, proved heavier than any legal chain. Her autonomy, though legally restored, remained perpetually questioned, a ghost in the machine of public perception. This was not living. It was merely existing under an eternal spotlight. This was not living. It was merely existing under an eternal spotlight. That light first flickered into being not in the sterile glow of a courtroom, but under the manufactured innocence of a children's variety show. A precocious talent barely a decade old signed her name to a contract exchanging childhood for a future carved from performance. The Mickey Mouse Club, a crucible of adolescent ambition, polished her edges. It taught her to smile on command, to project a joy that would soon become a burden. The machine, then nascent, began its hum. The release of Baby One More Time was not merely a debut, it was a detonation, a seismic event that reshaped the pop landscape and cemented her as an instant icon. Overnight, the girl from Kentwood became a global commodity, her image plastered on every surface, her voice inescapable. The golden handcuffs clicked shut with a barely audible pause whisper. Every move, every utterance, every fleeting glance became public property, meticulously catalogued, endlessly debated. The scent of fresh success, potent and intoxicating, masked the corrosive tang of perpetual observation. She was no longer a person, she was a phenomenon, an industry unto herself. The pressure, a silent, unseen weight, began to compress slowly, inexorably. The architects of her empire, blind to the human cost, saw only expanding territories. This was the blueprint for an Pa's inventory of sins, not her own, but those inflicted upon her. The initial cracks in the foundation, barely visible beneath the glitter, were already forming. The initial cracks in the foundation, barely visible beneath the glitter, were already forming. What followed was a Pa's anatomy of a fall, meticulously documented by an insatiable public. The golden cage, once a symbol of success, began to feel like a trap. Marriages faltered. Motherhood, usually a private journey, became a reality show. Each misstep amplified, each vulnerability exploited. The lens of scrutiny, initially distant, pressed itself against her very skin. The year 2007 was not merely a calendar entry, it was a watershed. A public unraveling, broadcast live, the shaved head, the attack on a paparazzi vehicle. These were not random acts. They were desperate cries for silence in a world that refused to grant it. The media, a ravenous beast, fed voraciously on her pain. Every stumble, every tear, every perceived eccentricity was currency. The narrative shifted from pop princess to cautionary tale, her image irrevocably tarnished by the mud of speculation. The whispers of instability grew into a deafening roar. In the cold light of February 2008, the legal apparatus moved. A temporary conservatorship, ostensibly for her protection, was enacted. It quickly became permanent. Her life, her finances, her choices, all placed under the control of others. This was not a rescue. It was a Pa's digital coffin, sealed by the courts, observed by millions. The empire, though still generating wealth, was now governed by unseen hands. Her destiny, once her own, became a legal construct. The weight of this new reality, heavy and unyielding, promised a long, silent winter. The long, silent winter began. Under the cold steel of legal decree, her life became an inventory. Britney Spears, her father, was appointed conservator of her person and estate. A digital coffin, indeed. Every financial transaction, every career negotiation, every personal choice, from medical treatments to who she could see, was filtered through this new apparatus. The court documents, sealed tighter than a tomb, offered little transparency to the outside world. This was not merely supervision, it was an annexation of autonomy. Pause. A decade plus, 13 years of dictated existence. Further revelations would paint a picture of control so absolute it bordered on the grotesque. Allegations surfaced, forced performances, limited access to her own wealth, restrictions on communication. Her phone, her car, even her right to drive were subject to approval. The empire, generating millions, was no longer hers to command. It was a machine, and she was the primary, often unwilling, cog. Early whispers of discontent, muted attempts to challenge the arrangement, were swiftly extinguished by the system itself. Legal representation, initially appointed by the court, seemed to serve the conservatorship's perpetuation rather than her liberation. The illusion of protection curdled into the bitter taste of imprisonment. This was the anatomy of a slow-motion fall, witnessed by millions, understood by few. The concrete walls of her gilded cage were invisible, yet undeniably present. Her voice, deep, gravelly, world-weary, slow and deliberate pacing with a subtle tremor of suppressed emotion. Yet, even the most meticulously constructed digital coffin can develop cracks. The public, initially passive observers, began to question the narrative. A seemingly innocuous podcast, then a series of social media posts, ignited what would become known as the Free Britney movement. This was no organized political campaign. It was a fan-driven forensic audit, a crowdsourced investigation into the alleged abuses of power. Online forums became digital war rooms. Dedicated individuals, armed with little more than internet access and righteous indignation, pieced together fragments, court filings, old interviews, cryptic social media updates from Spears herself, each a potential clue. They sought patterns in the silence, discrepancies in the official statements. The movement identified key players within the conservatorship, questioning their motives and the financial incentives at play. Protests, initially small, gathered momentum outside courthouses, demanding transparency. The chants, the signs, the collective digital roar began to chip away at the facade of a benevolent legal arrangement. Celebrities, once silent, began to lend their voices. This was not a plea for sympathy, it was a demand for accountability. The inevitable crack in the concrete had appeared. The machine, once so seamless, began to show. The strain, the truth, like rust, was slowly, inexorably, working its way to the surface. To the surface. Pause. The inventarizatsia Grekov, inventory of sins, commenced with her voice. In June 2021, exhausted yet unyielding, she appeared before the court. This was not a performance. This was a pause post-mortem audit, posthumous audit of her own life. 13 years of silence gave way to a torrent of bitter truth. She spoke of forced medication, of psychotropic drugs that usurped her will, of an IUD installed against her explicit desire, of being compelled to work until she broke. Financial records, once sealed under 7 locks, began to leak. Every dollar spent on her maintenance was a nail in the coffin of her financial autonomy. The judge listened. The world listened. The obolomki imperii, fragments of an empire, built upon her name, began to crumble. This was not a plea for freedom. This was a pause prigovor, verdict. This was not a plea for freedom. This was a pause prigorov, verdict. Following this public confession, the pause 10 bunker, shadow of the bunker, began to recede. It became known that phone conversations were monitored. Correspondence was controlled. In her bedroom, according to testimonies, recording devices were allegedly installed. Her private life, every breath, every whisper, transformed into a dossier. This was a paused Cifrovoy Grobe, digital coffin, meticulously constructed around her. Every step, every decision, even the most intimate, passed through a filter of approval. Threats of losing her children, of forced hospitalization, served as levers of pressure. This was not guardianship. This was a pause Maya Surubka slavey, meat grinder of glory, grinding personality into a resource. A system designed to protect became an instrument of suppression, a name on a contract, a machine for generating profit. The gears of that machine, once set in motion, do not halt easily. Even after the perceived liberation, the residue of control clung to her like radioactive dust. The world celebrated a victory, oblivious to the insidious erosion that continued beneath the surface. Her iconic status, a gilded cage, trapped her gaze in an eternal reflection. The glitter, once a beacon, now a blinding glare. The misery, a constant companion, whispered in the quiet hours. It was a slow poison, metastasizing within the fragile architecture of her being. The public demanded spectacle. She delivered. Each performance, each public appearance, a further excavation of a soul already laid bare. This relentless scrutiny, the perpetual inventory of her every move, finally fractured something essential. The pause. 2026 scandal, when it erupted, was not an isolated event. It was the inevitable consequence. The final brutal chapter in a story of endless consumption. This was the true pause, anatomia padina, anatomy of a fall, meticulously documented yet willfully ignored. The audit of this particular tragedy is complex. The machine had been dismantled, but its phantom limb still reached, leaving scars on the landscape. The public, ever hungry, demanded a definitive narrative, a clean ending. There is no clean ending here. Only the quiet hum of a fortune amassed, a pause legacy built on a broken spirit. The question remains, who truly benefited? The architects of the conservatorship, the media feeding on scandal, the corporations selling her image. All thrived. She merely survived. The speculations surrounding her inheritance, the meticulous division of assets, speaks volumes. It is a testament to the fact that even in freedom, the chains of commerce remain. Her current existence, a fragile piece, is shadowed by the constant threat of renewed public interest, a new cycle of scrutiny. This was not merely an individual's ordeal. It was a pause verdict on an entire system. A stark reminder that the price of fame, when paid in humanity, is always too high. The ethical vacuum that allowed such a prolonged subjugation demands an answer. But the silence, like the cold, hard cash, offers no absolution. The pause, remnants of an empire, are scattered, a bitter testament to what was lost.